Well, welcome to the Church Office podcast.
My name's Gavin Smith, and if you're joining us on video, then here's a little wave.
We're excited to have Nigel Ring join us.
I've never actually heard the word wicked and accountant put in the same sentence.
Well, good morning and welcome to the Church Office podcast. If you're listening in or you're watching on video, then thank you so much for joining us. It's 2023 and I've got a special guest, John Truscott, with us this morning. John, thank you for joining us, mate.
Gavin, great to be with you again.
Good to be here. And before we jump into our topic, which is kind of healthy churches, and as we start the new year thinking about review, I just want to do a quick shout out to Ags Hawkins and Karen Coleman. Just thank you so much for listening into the podcast. Thank you for taking the time to write to us over the Christmas break and encourage us here at the Church Office. So really, really grateful for you and for all of our listeners who are giving great feedback, questions and ideas. So yeah, we appreciate the community that's building around this, and look forward to serving you today on this topic. John, nice Christmas break for you. Good to be back at your desk.
Well, I tweeted earlier this week as a sort of encouragement to everybody on a dark January morning that probably other people are feeling as you do, and that had a lot of feedback. So I think probably most people find this week particularly difficult. Yeah,
first week back is hard, isn't it? Yeah, trying to get all the plates spinning again and get everyone in the right places, everyone get the right things they need. So it is a bit of a challenge. So today, John, we're talking about healthy churches. I guess lots of teams and individuals or staff members will be quite reflective in this first few months of the year, thinking about what we need to prioritize. I know we're going away next week as a team, as a kind of on a sort of staff retreat or staff day. So all of those things are happening, aren't they? And I just thought this would be a really interesting topic to kind of pick your brains, because you've got huge experience of working with churches. You've got this fantastic tool. Your website is full of resources that are just so useful and helpful. Tell us your thoughts.
You're doing health, Gavin.
Yeah.
Some years ago, I go back a long way, and some years ago, the big buzzword was church growth.
Yeah.
And yet we all want to see growth in every form, not just in numerical growth.
Yeah.
But behind growth must be health.
Yeah.
I think it's a much better topic to be tackling.
Yeah.
A healthy church can be used by God in whatever way he wishes.
Yeah.
If we just look for the numbers game, then I think we've gone off on a wrong tangent.
Yeah, that's very wise. That's a great place to start. And so, John, tell us a bit about this tool that you've developed on your website, the Church Health Review. I've read through it and gone through it this year. Tell us some of the background on this and your thinking on this.
Well, it goes back to my days in the organisation ad ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Some people will remember and some people won't. But trying to think, I'm an analyst at heart.
Okay.
I like analysing things in church life. And so what I tried to do there for something I was writing, what we called a resource paper or a how-to guide, was how can you analyse what church life should cover.
Mm-hmm.
And I came up then with the basic idea of 5 dimensions, 5 areas that we could explore. And that's gone over into the Church Health Review. And the 5 are not activities. People sometimes start off, well, what's worship, although they don't define what worship is. There's fellowship, they don't define what fellowship is, and so on and so forth. I felt, no, it's not activity we want to do, it's relationship.
Yeah.
And so I developed the idea of, and it's very similar to many other people's thinking on this, the idea of a Godward relationship, an usward relationship in a church, and an outward relationship.
Yeah.
But then I added 2 others to it. One was leadership.
Yeah.
And one was organization or support behind the scenes to enable all this to happen.
Yeah.
So that gave me 5 different areas of church life. So that's where it all started from.
Yeah. It's great. And I love those 5 categories that you've put together in there. I think the upward, the inward, the outward. Well, you don't say inward, do you? Because you usward.
I coined this phrase usward because inward sort of gave the wrong impression to me.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
I mean, there's up, in and out. Different people use different ideas here. But what I'm trying to say is, it's what we want to talk about is relationship.
Yeah.
Whatever words you use, not activity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And once you start talking about worship as one of them, then you've got to define worship. And to me, worship isn't just what we do on a Sunday. It's what we do Monday to Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah.
And so a relationship with the Trinity, with God himself, with Jesus, with the Holy Spirit, seems to be a better way of tackling that. And hence the relationship with God, relationship with each other.
Yes.
Brits are very bad at.
Yeah.
And perhaps the Welsh are so much better at it. I
don't know about that, John.
And our relationship with the world outside. If we build a castle, put a moat around it, and put a portcullis to stop the world infiltrating the church, then we have lost what Christ told us to do in his final commandments.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think on this podcast, we're not going to give you the summary to follow to get a healthy church. We're not going to give you all the tools that you need, because we know, we must recognize at the start that Christ is the one who's building his church, isn't he? He's the great shepherd, and we are tools in it, and his grace is at work. And sometimes church is messy, John, isn't it? And it's not as straightforward. And
you say sometimes, Gavin.
Well, maybe all the time, John. Yeah, it is messy, and because we're talking about relationships here, relationships are messy, aren't they? And they take work. And so there's always I always get worried when I talk to people about doing a church review, because they often go, at the end of this, I'm going to feel so overwhelmed with having to do something. And what are those things? And but actually there's grace at work, and we can talk about how we apply some of this later. But there's a starting point that goes, actually, we need God to help us, and we need him to build his church and make the signpost big, give us the wisdom that we need, give us the right people in the right places to make all those things happen. So a little bit of a disclaimer there, John, maybe at the start of this.
Yeah, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. And in the Church Health Review, which is the tool you're talking about on my website, seeks to say that those 5 areas, those 5 relationships, including the leadership and the support, I think pretty well encapsulate everything that a church ought to be and ought to be concerned with. Yeah. But it's not activity, it's relationship, and then the leadership and support to enable those relationships to be healthy.
Yeah. And those categories are great. And John, you give this kind of lovely picture of context of when you're doing it. You've not only developed this model, with people that can go through the process and use the tool, but you've given a bit of context of books that are out there at the time that have been present. Take us through some of that, because you've checked it across lots of different things, isn't it? It isn't just a questionnaire.
It's a different, the model I've developed is a different starting point. Instead of saying, here are 3, 6, 10 marks of a healthy church, which is what the books tend to do. Yeah. And that's good. That's a good approach. Yeah. I start at a different point and say, let's think what a church should be doing or should be being. Yeah. And then test everything in that. So it's more complicated, because I'm testing a vast area of church life rather than certain marks of mission, as it were. Yeah. The books I suppose I was basing it on, well, some of them are well known and some are not. The one that's not well known is a workbook by somebody called John Cole. This goes back a few years now to the 1990s. Yeah. When he wrote a book called How to Be a Local Church. Yeah. A4 workbook, I've got it here. It's goldmine, because he was working in a rural Anglican diocese and trying to help churches move forward in their concept of what a church should be. Yeah. And some of the basic thinking comes from him. Much better known is Robert Warren's work and the Healthy Church's Handbook. I test what my model comes with against that. Yeah. People will have heard of Rick Warren in the States, no relation. Robert Warren and Rick Warren, no relation. And his purpose-driven church, that got a lot of publicity when it first came out. But he was basing that on purpose. Yeah. And to me, the one that is still just as relevant, though it's gone out of the headlines, is natural church development. by Christian Schwarz.
Yeah.
And that's a European book based on research about churches that are growing and churches that are not, and what marks out a healthy church.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, although that's gone out of the sort of mainstream thinking now, because it's getting on a bit in a few years, to me, that is gold dust again.
Yes.
Of marks of a healthy church, of a spirituality and everything else. And the research discovered that, you know, some of the marks at the time when there was thinking about church growth,
Mm-hmm.
were actually not what was appropriate for church health.
Yeah.
And there was too much emphasis on the numbers game and not enough on what Christ has called his church to be.
Yeah.
So what I've written is on the shoulders of great people who've written great stuff.
Yeah.
And although I have a different approach, I've tested it against, and it fits with those sort of 4 or 5 sources.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. And I think under each of those 5 themes that you've developed, you've created a sets of questions, haven't you, that people can go through. Take us through, what does that look like, John?
Well, it gets quite complicated. And if there's a criticism I'd have myself of this, it can get complicated. What I do is take those 5 dimensions of Godward, usward, outward, leadership and support. And then I ask 9 questions about each of those. So there's 45 questions, 9 times 5.
Mm-hmm.
And the questions have several they're quite lengthy questions in that they go on for several phrases, because they've got to cover a wide variety of churches.
Yeah.
And they're all grouped together in particular ways. So just to give you an example, the first question on the Godward theme, and they're open questions, is to what extent are the services prepared and led in such a creative way that everyone is drawn into meaningful involvement rather than spectating, with appropriate variety in forms of liturgy and days, times, lengths that appeal to a range of tastes. Yeah. Yeah. Now that's quite a mouthful, but what I'm hoping that any church will just pick from that what's relevant for them.
Yeah.
And so there is these 9 questions on each of the 5 areas. And then for each of those questions, I have what I call a number of sample tests to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. What matters is the question, not the sample tests, because one sample test won't apply to your church or something like that.
Yeah.
But for example, the first sample test on that one is people acknowledging a series of excellence about each service, a sense of excellence about each service, with a blend of confession, prayer and intercession, praise, silence, news, Bible teaching, sacrament, ministry, etc. I'm just trying to give some ideas of what a healthy answering of this question might look like.
Yeah.
So that people can't say, oh, we're good at that, and sort of put a tick against it.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, I found going through the questions really useful. And I think there were some of them where I was thinking, right, how would I answer this? What do I need to look at? You can then go into the sample tests that you've got and go, okay, I see where this is going. I see where I need to kind of, think more about this area. And I found it really, really helpful, John, to have that sample testing there. I know people might jump straight to it, but it actually just reaffirms and strengthens the question for me to bring real clarity to go,
okay.
Yeah.
But in the print, I keep saying, there's a box that keeps saying, it's not, this model is not based on the sample tests. They're not what it's about, it's the questions.
Yeah,
they're only sample tests to see how it might work out for a church.
Yeah, and that's excellent. And John, let's go into some of the themes, because we're a church administration podcast. We're reaching people who, I guess, would not necessarily be sat in the room when you're, if you're reviewing the Godward one or something like that. We may not get invited into those kind of conversations, but yet we are very represented in the areas of the outward, I think, and obviously the support and the leadership.
Support is the one that would most apply.
Really,
and each of these I link to a part of the body. And for the support one, I have great fun because I link that to our gut and our intestines. And I hope administrators will share the joke with me
Yeah.
That actually and I'm an administrator myself,
Yeah.
a passionate administrator. And what we're doing is the unseen internal organs of the body of Christ,
Yeah.
to enable it to function well and be healthy.
Yeah.
I start with worship being the heart. I'd go through the mind and all sort of thing. But when it comes to administration and our supporters, it's the gut.
Here we are, the gut.
So we're the intestines
Yeah.
of the church. We're the liver of the church. We're the stomach of the church.
Yeah. The hidden work that goes on. Yeah.
I rather enjoy being that myself. But I mean, I have a warped sense of humor, I'm afraid. So.
And what were some of the other body parts then for the other ones, John? I'm intrigued now.
Okay, well, I said the heart is worship.
Yeah.
Is the Godward side.
Yeah.
The bloodstream is
Okay.
the usward side, because that's what's linking everything up together.
Yeah.
So I do a blood pressure check for that one. The eye is the outward theme.
Yeah.
Is what we see, what we're seeing outside. Leadership is the brain, and support is the intestines.
The gut.
But since Jesus himself talked about Paul himself talked about the body as a picture of the church, it just seems to me that we can take body parts.
Yeah.
You get squeamish. I'm sorry about that. All people who are now feeling they shouldn't have had any breakfast, I'm very sorry. But to me, administration is all about intestines.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, John, what advice would you give then to administrators who kind of starting the year, undertaking a review in different sections? Because, I'd be interested in what your thoughts are on that.
Well, if it's just specifically the administrators, the point about this model is it's quite complicated.
Yeah.
And so you can actually simplify it by just taking one of those 5 themes and do another theme next year or something like that. It doesn't mean the whole thing has to be done in one big exercise.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
So you could take the support theme and say, let's do a test on that this year. Next year we could do a different one. And so the support theme is based into 4 questions on administration and 4 questions on resources.
Yeah.
And 1 question on how that's developed. Each of these 5 areas has a question on development.
Yeah.
So on administration, it's about the office, it's about the structures, it's about the coordination, and it's about good practice.
Yeah.
On resources, it's about staffing, it's about plant, it's about finance, and it's about resources in general.
Yeah.
So for an administrator wanting to do a review, rather than a church wanting to do a review, support function would be a great one to start with.
Yeah. That's good to remind us, isn't it? As we talk about it, it is a whole church review, isn't it? It isn't just the one area that we're involved in. It's like teams sitting down together, or elders sitting down together with deacons. It's PCC sitting down and saying, right, let's review this. I think the support one, John, is interesting because we've had a couple of years, haven't we, in COVID, where everything's changed in terms of our ministry structures, in terms of our outputs, our capacity of some things may have changed in those areas. And then we've got this cost of living crisis, and churches are affected by their giving. And I know some places are already saying, if we don't see a change by the first quarter, we're going to end up having redundancies. And so that there seems like we almost need multiple plans in this as well of review. There's some tough times in there, isn't there, in trying to assess them?
There are, yes. I mean, one of the tests is finance, because that comes in the resources section. How true is it that our finances are seen as key areas of spiritual ministry, which serve rather than dictate vision? And are they overseen with wisdom and thoroughness? That's the question.
Yeah.
So is money there to dictate vision? So our vision must depend on how much money we've got. Or are we saying, is it there as a spiritual ministry to enable vision?
Yes.
So a lot of this is attitudinal. I'm actually asking for questions about what's our thinking on this area.
Yes.
And administrators need to have that slant on everything.
Yeah.
We're not just, we may be gut, but we can do some thinking as gut.
Yes, absolutely.
and have an attitude that says, I'm handling money as an administrator.
Mm.
I'm handling financial resources in some way.
Yes.
How can we use those? How do we view them?
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, back in worship, I've got stewardship as one of the areas.
Okay.
So the handling of finance comes in the support in the function.
Yeah, yeah.
But the thinking about stewardship itself comes in the worship section, because to me, it's all linked up with our relationship with God as disciples.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's clever, isn't it, John? Yeah. Yeah, that's useful. Yeah.
But don't get me onto finance too much, because I get so excited about it that I go on at length.
And there's all these different things, and yeah, I think the support one is great, and I think it's worth, if you're administrator, having a look through that, having a think through those questions, interacting with other staff about how you're doing within your role and how that fits all this together. I think there's some useful. The one that really struck me, John, was the outward section. I was really challenged by that. It was for me, it's so healthy to think, we're in a season where there's a lot of need outside in communities. We may have projects, we may not have things that we're doing that reach into our community, but our Sunday morning services should be an outward, expression.
Oh, exactly. At my church last Sunday, we had somebody who'd come back to church for the first time, I think, for many years.
Okay.
So there's an outreach aspect to how we deal with people like that coming to our normal Sunday service.
Yeah.
And that's why I think just to talk about worship is the wrong approach.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because a Sunday morning service, just to take that little element of activity, should have a Godward dimension, an usward dimension, and an outward dimension.
Yeah.
It doesn't, worship doesn't equal Godward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Worship is everything.
Yeah.
And these three dimensions come. So to me, the outward theme has 4 questions on what I call openness.
Yes.
4 questions on outreach as such. So first of all, have we got an attitude of being open to the world in everything we do?
Yeah. Before
we then think about our outreach, which involves both direct proclamation, but also service, compassionate ministries, and how we serve our communities. And then again, how are we developing in that?
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And there were some points that really stuck out to me is, how are we helping our members to be outward, not just in an outward project that we're doing as a church, but actually, I think you write in there, one of the sample things and things to chew over is, are we supporting people in governors' roles, in PTA roles, in ways that they can play a part in their community, and how are we supporting them, and how do we give time for people to do some of those things?
Gavin, it pains me that sometimes people like me, as a quote unquote a Christian worker, I do Christian stuff as my job, are seen as somewhat, missionary and holy and worthy of prayer. And I used to tell the story of a friend of mine, he's retired now, who was headmaster of a big comprehensive on a sink estate in a nearby town. And no one thought of supporting him.
Yeah.
He wasn't a Christian worker. He was just a headmaster, head teacher in a tough comprehensive school in a rough area. We got our thinking completely warped if that's what we're thinking.
Yeah.
Because everybody has an outreach aspect to their daily work, to where they live. And my wife and I are moving house, we hope, in the next 2 or 3 months. And we're already praying for the road we're moving into, that we can be a presence for God there in some way. We don't know how, but we've got to have this attitude of being, that's why I call this the first 4 questions, openness. There's got to be an attitude of openness before we start thinking about words like evangelism, which scares most people silly.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. It's almost, living and breathing Christ and what Christ has done for us in the areas that we, function and live in every day, isn't it? And I think,
and just doing a good job of work. I mean,
yeah,
just the way we carry out our normal work or our relationships in our community matters just so much.
yeah. I love the scripture that Paul talks about, isn't he? The good works that God has prepared in advance for us to do. And
You should walk in, yes.
yeah, and there's just something lovely about that kind of, that, you know, your daily interactions. You know, I can think of good works as over and the big charitable things, or the things that I do over and above my normal week. But actually, these good works are everyday conversations, or kindness, or stopping, or praying, or serving someone. All of these things are God, you know, ordained moments and times for us to be outward. And I love that. And being challenged by that through you know, thinking and going through your review.
Well, organizations like the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity and things like that, LIC, have done so much in this respect of demonstrating that our daily life is our outreach, our witness.
Yeah.
And every Christian can do that.
Yeah, absolutely right. And so, you know, we're going back to Sunday mornings, and I love your thinking on that, is that you probably should encounter all 5 of those, shouldn't you? You should encounter leadership on a
Yep.
Sunday. You should encounter a well-organized Sunday morning, you know, with support and signposts and, you know, all the things that we need to run smoothly, you know, that Godward, the usward community, family getting together. The outwards, as you know, we're talking about that, somebody who walks in off the street who've never been in a church. We get that occasionally. Yeah, we should encounter all of it, shouldn't we, John?
And that's the whole point. They're 5 dimensions of church life which impact everything we do. There isn't very much that we do that isn't in some way got a link with one of those, with all of those 5.
Yeah.
And that's again where I just think it's more healthy to think about relationships with God, with each other, with the world, than it is to think about activity.
Yeah.
Worship supposedly equals Sunday morning.
Yeah.
When I just don't think it does.
Yeah.
If we understood the word worship properly.
Yeah.
Outreach just being when we're talking to somebody about Jesus. Well, of course it includes that, but being his witness in the job we do, being the best teacher that we can be, being the best cleaner that we can be.
Yeah.
It's just so important that we get a more holistic view of things. And for administrators, I just want to say, you know, I've worked for many, many years with church administrators, operations people, and things like that, people like that. Again, for many people, I think we've changed the culture now quite a bit, but earlier on, this was regarded as a separate category from Christian stuff.
Yeah.
So the treasurer wasn't in ministry; they were handling filthy lucre. There was a real attitude that there was spiritual work and there was practical work, and it was put nicely, you know, like that. But actually, what it meant was there's proper stuff.
Yeah.
If you know the book about the trellis and the vine, that's giving a more balanced view. We need to separate out and see which is which. But to me, they're both spiritual ministries to glorify God in, ministries in which we serve Jesus, ministries in which we need the Holy Spirit infusing us, and enabling us.
Yeah. And one of the things that's kept coming back to me time and time over, that, you know, just the break, Christmas break, is this kind of, you know, we're involved in a very practical work. We talk about the gut work, but there's a spiritual effect to the work that we do in the church, you know, and I'd want to encourage administrators listening to this, is that you know, we may see ourselves as task driven or task orientated, but actually the practical work that we do that might be unseen has a huge spiritual effect on the health of the church, on the unity of the church, on enabling the mission and the gospel to go out more effectively, enabling our leaders to be more effective, you know, with their time and their resources and their gifting. There's so much spiritual work that we have to recognize, don't we? Because I think if you don't make that connection, you're going to lose motivation and drive. But if you can link that, and if you can see what you do makes a difference with a spiritual effect for this church, I think it brings fresh joy. I think it brings fresh motivation and enthusiasm, and it is a spiritual gift, and it has a spiritual effect.
That's put marvelously. I had a lovely email just before Christmas from somebody. I lead the tutor team for UK Church Administrator Network on the distance learning course that we have for church administrators. And somebody's just completing the course and wrote a beautiful email to me to say thank you for the course. It's helped her in her relationship with Jesus.
Oh, good. Yeah.
It's helped her to see how her work impacts the work of the church.
Yeah.
So there's both a personal aspect there and the thing in a way she hadn't seen before.
Yes.
Just been doing an administrative job, I think, before.
Yeah.
Now she had a much broader view of the spiritual nature of it, and it was just lovely to get something like that.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. It's yeah, that's lovely. Yeah. Because on that journey of training to be better, you realize, don't you, why you're there and the purpose why you're there and what God has called you to do and the difference that it's going to make. And yeah, I love that, John. I think that's great. Any advice then? So you've given us some advice saying you could focus on one section, 1 year, one theme, another. Broaden this out. I've shared this amongst our team and saying, hey, have a look at this model, have a look at some of these questions, because it is hard to think about all these things. So the fact that you've given us a structure to work through, you've given us the questions, the support is there with the samples. I think this is an excellent tool to be used, John. Any other bits of advice on this as someone goes to the website, downloads it and starts working through it?
Okay. Don't be put off by its seeming complexity, because it's trying to do a big job of cover everything.
Yeah.
As I said, you can take one of the 5 themes, or you can take a section within one of those themes. If you're particularly interested in a particular project for this year that you're, shall we say, an outreach project of some kind, go and have a look at which bits of that might link in with that. And it may not just be the outreach area, the outward dimension. It may be something to do about the Godward dimension.
Yeah.
And I would say you can use it individually. If you're an administrator, just sit down with a support theme and work it out yourself, see how it applies. You can do it as a church leadership.
Yeah.
You can do it as a home group in many ways.
Yeah.
Bits of it. Because then you've got people who aren't in leadership necessarily getting interested in what the church is all about.
Yeah.
I think the danger of the top-down approach, just leadership doing something like this, is that it's seen as a leadership tool when it's a Christian people's tool. The actual church health review is in the resources section of my website.
Yeah.
In the health checks index.
Yeah.
Go to, first of all, resources, then health checks index, and you'll find it as HC4 and HC5. But if you want a very simple version of it, just with the headings, go to the articles index and go to article A35 called Mapping Your Church.
Yeah. Which
looks at ways in which you can map all sorts of things in your church, but it also includes what I call there the 5 themes map.
Yeah.
Which are the same 5 themes, the same question, the same basic headings, but it's a very, very simple form of it.
Fab. And great.
And might be a simpler way in for some people.
Yeah. And I know you're worried about it being too complicated, but I think the five themes are really clear. I think the questions are broad and helpful. So, I certainly wasn't put off by it, John. But the mapping one I think is a simpler version. And you've said that we can put these on the church office website for people to download.
Yeah, very, very happy.
We'll make the links available to John's site. I mean, John, while we're talking about your site, I mean, you've got something like over 205 resources, training notes, articles for people. In a very organized index, and everything's labeled and numbered. Let me encourage you, if you're a listener and you haven't checked out John's site, then please go and put in John Truscott into Google. He's going to come up straight away. He is the top performing top man on church administration.
Careful. I'm an enthusiast for church administration.
John, you've got a wonderful gift, and you've served the church hugely, so thanks for all you're doing. Check it out. And I know this podcast is listened to not just in the UK but wider across the States and various other countries. The resources are there, and John, you make them free and available for people to use.
Yeah. Everything on the site is free. You can print 30 copies. All I say is put a limit on that, because just to stop anybody doing a mass mailing of anything.
Yeah.
If you're in another country, bear in mind that I'm writing from a UK cultural perspective.
Yeah.
I would just make that point, and I can't claim to be able to relate it to an African culture, an American culture.
Yeah.
In fact, part of my worry in doing all of this over my lifetime has been that much of the church thinking in the 1970s and 80s came from the States, because they were far ahead of us.
Yeah.
But it did mean it was coming from a culture that was foreign for many British churches.
Yeah.
What I've always tried to do is to take the ideas from that and to see what applies in an English culture, or sorry, British culture.
Yeah.
I mustn't forget the Welsh. Forgive me. And to work from that. But that means I'm not necessarily saying this applies directly, although the work it's being applied and used by other people in Africa, in the Far East, and in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, it's so true. And John, if as people go through the Church Review and they have a look at this this tool, again on the Church Office website and on John's website, there are if you want to focus on budgeting, or you think there's an area of outreach that you want to look at, there are specific things that are targeted. If you were thinking about running a church cafe, or opening up a warm space for people who might be in debt crisis or food crisis, to come on in for an hour or so, there's advice and information on how you might do that, training on how you might do that across lots of different sites, and do that. Before we go, John, let's do a little promo for UCAN. You were the founder of it back many years ago, and supporting church administrators to link into it. Tell us a little bit more about your passion for that, because I want to sell that as well. That administrators shouldn't be on their own, and that is one of the big highlights, isn't it, for me?
Well, I'd also want to push your Church Office site, Gavin, because I just think that's doing some really brilliant practical stuff, and you're doing pro formas of things that people need and stuff like that, which I'm not.
Yeah.
So I'd like to think the work you're doing complements the work that I'm doing.
Absolutely.
In writing on websites, but you can, you can. UK Church Administrator Network. I handed that over, would you believe, I think it's 5 years now.
Wow, it's flown by.
And I ran it, I started it, ran it. It was based on something similar that we'd had in the administrative organization in the 1980s and 90s. And handed it over 5 years to a team of directors. Gavin, you're on the board now, I believe.
Right, yeah.
And they have developed it in a wonderful way, in a way I could never have done. So they've expanded the way it operates. It's grown quite a bit since my day.
Yeah.
They're doing training events for administrators. They're doing a management course for operational staff, to complement the distance learning course for church administrators that I still run.
Yeah.
They're giving consultancy advice, and it is really expanding. I'm just thrilled at the way it's been taken over and developed. And I'd like to think that if you're an administrator, or if you're interested in church administration or operations in any way at all, that you're in touch with my website, I hope, with UCAN, and with the Church Office. I think there's three areas of Christians working to develop a thinking about administration that is biblical, that is enthusiastic, that is wholesome, and we're all doing slightly different things, the three of us, the three areas, but put together, it's just exciting to see how things have come on since the 1980s, when I was first in this work.
Yeah, it's
Thank God. It's wonderful.
It's lovely, and you alluded in this podcast, John, about just how the culture's changed, where there are lots more church administrators around now. There are people in roles that this role and gifting is recognised in local churches far more, and so there are more people in posts, whether it be a part-time, few hours a week, whether it be in a full-time role, in a more management role.
And the world has got more complex in the meantime.
Yeah, and governance gets harder, and all these things, constantly changing. And it's good not to do it on your own. And I think there are, like as John said, 3 places that you can go and get some support, and we'd love to do that. So thank you, John. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for sharing.
Gavin, and I look forward to how your work is going to develop. I look forward to how UCAN is going to develop. I'm going to be moving into retirement over the next year or 2, but I'd like to keep the website going. I'd like to continue writing, because there's lots of things I've done in my life that I'd like to get into print.
Yeah.
But it's youngsters like you, you're very young compared with me, and the UCAN board that I'm just so excited about, that there's a vision for this.
Yeah.
That I can retire with confidence, knowing that the work is going on in better and bigger and greater ways than ever I was able to do it.
It's encouraging, John. Well, thank you so much for all you've done. Thank you for your time today. Listeners, thank you for listening into this. Please check out this tool. Please give it a go. And there are resources and help available. If there's anything you would like us, any topics that you'd like us to cover, or any questions or forms that you need, things that you think, oh, this would be useful, could be a time saver, just give you maybe a little bit more confidence to go, yeah, I'm doing the right thing here, then please get in contact with us. We'd love to be able to serve you. And please check out the website for new resources, and we'll see you on the podcast again this year. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you, Gavin.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.